All right, welcome to the Coach and the Counselor, where we aim to create the most honest, helpful, and impactful conversations about youth development, sports development, um, and both one that honors the science of child development and also the art of coaching real kids in real situations. So today's kind of a special day where we have um, the day after the draft last night, and we are able to have someone on here with Matt Pajak, who's been director of player and performance analytics, someone who's worked for USA Baseball for almost 5 years, someone who's worked for the Cape Cod League for another 3 years, and who is a co-founder of Loden Sports, where they provide objective and efficient ways to measure performance and also offer solutions for talent identification and athlete development. So maybe no better person to have on the show here the day after the draft, where some crazy things happened last night with 27 shortstops getting drafted, 10 of them coming from college, but 17 of them coming from the high school ranks. Matt, quite the intro right there to talk about player development and everything that's happened. Welcome to the show, and what are your thoughts on last night?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say about 27 shortstops going on night one of the draft is that maybe one of them will actually play in the big league shortstop position. Um, no, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's been a lot in the last 10 years of kind of a little bit of a white whale, if you will, kind of how I carved my way through the amateur baseball space. But a lot of talent identification stuff, a lot of player development stuff, and mostly founded in objective information. So have been very fortunate to work with a lot of players and coaches, well, a lot of coaches and players, usually through the coaches, kind of more jumping in and out. So it's not like a traditional coaching background, but definitely plenty of coaching opportunities have been kind of dropped in here and there, and opportunities to work with a lot of different people at a lot of different stages of their development. So really excited to be on and kind of dive into a number of different things that we talked about on this thing.
Yeah, let's talk about your history a little bit. Let's go back to the Cape Cod. How did you get into the Cape, and what did you do there, and what did you learn about your experience there?
Well, I think this is something that we'll eventually get into under the one truth. I used to go down to the Cape for a week every summer, family vacation. Um, and I got involved in like the 1 week baseball camps down there in the morning so I can chat them. And the guy who rented us a vacation rental for a week was the commissioner of the Cape, back when I was a kid. So fast forward a handful of years, and there was a reach out there about internship opportunities while I was in college. Got me connected with Harwich. I actually have the Harwich shirt on. Just got done with my workout. Got me
Uh,
connected with Harwich. And then just, after that, it was a little bit more of like, not an interview for the job, but like, hey, do you want to come here and do this? Because it was a volunteer opportunity. There was an unpaid deal. So kind of like the last domino. When you're going up to the Cape as an intern or a summer worker, it's like you got to secure paid employment, and then you got to secure a place to live, which might be the hardest part, especially considering, when you're dealing with the teams, their priorities are finding the players places to live, not their interns.
right.
So, um, was able to secure a job at a golf course, and then was able to secure a place to live through, I think my grandpa reached out to someone that he knew that lived down in Orleans, knew a lady in Brewster who lived across the street from the lady that I lived with. So
It's the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon and the Matt Pajak version of that. So that's great that you got in there. What did you do specifically there, and why? I guess that kind of probably cemented your love for the game of baseball and being in the analytics space.
yeah, I mean, frankly, I hadn't, there was nothing to do with analytics at the time. And I didn't really have any idea of jobs in baseball. I was just like, okay, like go down to the Cape for the summer. It was between my junior and senior year of college. And I was majoring marketing at the time at Bryant University, and, more or less. So I was like, all right, this is something to do in the summer. Um, so I go down there, and it was everything from, working the grill never forget. I was like 3 straight hours. I didn't pick my head up, just flipping burgers and dogs, um,
You're
selling
treated like a
50/50 raffle tickets.
treated like a true rookie then.
Exactly. The best part was at the end of the night, anything that you cooked that didn't get sold, you just make yourself a burger at the end. Get inventive, cut the hot dog in half, put it on top. Um, but like putting up the banners in the outfield, taking them down, like there's a lot of setup, tear down, just a number of different jobs, selling the merch. Um, had a cool opportunity to kind of, you know, I was very fortunate that they were, open to, ideas, I guess, that I had that I tried to tie back to what I was trying to get into, marketing, and came up with the idea to do root beer floats, uh, which they had, a local ice cream sponsorship. So we got ice cream from them. And then A&W Root Beer was local. They had a sponsorship from them. So I kind of saw the two banners in the outfield. I was like, well, what if we made root beer floats? They ended up being a smash hit. I think they're still selling them there 10 years later. So,
Nice.
yeah, that was pretty cool. But that's kind of how it all started. And then was able to further my relationship with Paul Gallup, who was the commissioner of the Cape at the time. Um, and then he kind of became somewhat of a mentor to me. And then he invited me back the next summer to be his intern and kind of manage the roster inflow, the contracts that were coming in and out, all the players that summer. So it was a little bit more of a baseball ops job the second summer, a little bit more of like a pure volunteer, whatever they need you to do the first summer.
And then tell me about the evolution of, I guess, eventually, leaving there and then you got into USA Baseball as sort of the next gig, right?
Yeah, so worked that summer on the Cape. That second summer was right after I graduated. Worked with Paul. He introduced me to a whole bunch of people that he knew. Notably John Green, Randy Flores, Matt Hyde. So John Green was a long time national crowd checker for the Dodgers. Randy Flores is now, I think, the VP of scouting for the Cardinals. At the time, he was working with a group called On Deck Digital, which you can fact check it if you want. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they ended up merging with Synergy, or they became Synergy, which is a pretty well-known video platform in the space. And Matt Hyde is still, holding it down for the Yankees in the Northeast as an area scout, just kind of like a stalwart legend of baseball up in the Northeast. And having these conversations with these guys that were working in baseball, it was the first time that it kind of opened my eyes to like, hey, there's jobs in baseball that aren't playing the game. I guess I never really understood the periphery of the front office and scouts and player development and all these different things at the time. Growing up in Western Massachusetts, I think I was a little bit shielded from the world of travel ball and, chasing a college scholarship and all those different things. So it was eye-opening to me. It was all very interesting. I was fascinated through the lens at which a scout was viewing the game, position by position. And it completely morphed the way that, I watched baseball. And at that point, I was like, I think it'd be really cool to work in baseball. So went back to Western Mass that fall and anticipated to attend the winter meetings. And then actually ended up getting into a job hiring process with DraftKings. And that was back when they got shut down in New York, like right in the middle of my interview process. But they ultimately offered the job, and I didn't know the direction that the industry was going. Was it gambling? Was it fantasy sports? Whatever it was. So I decided not to take that job, which kind of put me back at square one. And the winter meetings had passed. I was going for that job, and I was like deep in the hiring process, and then I get offered that, and I decided not to go to the winter meetings. And then the winter meetings pass, I don't take the job, and it's the end of December, and I'm kind of back at square one, and I was feeling a little.
Any regrets at this stage of the game now, a few years later, and what DraftKings has become?
Yeah, I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
Hence the regret, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there were definitely some stock options in there or something, a little bit of equity on the front end, even though it was going to be an entry level, customer rep job. But I mean, if you think about it, start at that level, and then 10 years later, I mean, who knows where I'd be right now.
Right.
Um,
sorry to put you into depression.
yeah, geez.
And
No,
I
I think,
guess I guess somewhere in there too, right? You went back to get your master's degree at Georgetown, right?
yeah, I decided to do that online um, when I was at USA Baseball. So that was the beginning of 2017. So I ended up at USA Baseball through I was on the USA Baseball shop because I was very into gear at the time, like most early 20s, late teens kids are. And I was on the USA Baseball shop and I found this camo hoodie. And I scrolled to the bottom, I saw employment opportunities, and there was a 9-month internship. And I'm like, I'm going to apply to this. So I told Paul Gallup, commissioner of the Cape, that I was applying for it. He reached out to the college national team director at USA, got pushed along, and like 2 weeks later, I packed up my Honda Civic and drove to North Carolina for the first time. Um, so that was one of those things where it was like 9 months an intern there, got offered another internship for another year, accepted it, and then at the beginning of 2017, finally got that full time position for the first time, which felt really good. Obviously, I had to work pretty hard for it. Um,
You
but
were
that was when I started.
grinding it out in the minor leagues for a while there, just grinding it out and grinding it out, eating hot dogs and leftover hamburgers until you get your first gig. So that's great.
Listen, the $1,000 a month from USA Baseball was no joke. We had three of us in a 2-bedroom apartment, and then there was one period there where like there were some people that were getting ready to head out. We had like 6 people in there, so we had like I had my own room because I was in there the longest, and then I had someone in the guest room, and then we had 3 people in the living room, air mattresses. So there was no couch in there or anything. It was just 3 air mattresses, and then we had, for 2 nights we had one dude sleeping in the kitchen.
Dang.
Yeah.
Dang. True grinder. That's the old school minor league system right there.
Oh yeah.
All right, so
So
you finish up, you do your time at USA. Um, let's segue into Loden Sports, and then let's get into this draft. So, how did you like what kind of epiphany did you have to say, man, there's a need for maybe just not maybe old school scouting, right? There's got to be a better way to evaluate talent. I mean, at some point that has to pop into your head, right?
yeah, I mean, I owe a lot to Sean Campbell, co-founder of Loden Sports. Worked with him at USA Baseball for a number of years. Came really close with him, and he kind of shaped the way that I was viewing a lot of things. He had scouted for 10 years, had scouted as a national cross-checker the last 2 years that he was with San Diego. So he was, you know, scouting the whole country, not just an area. So he had experience of kind of understanding what the whole lay of the land looked like, and he always said that the most subjective part of the scouting report, which he felt was a really important part of the scouting report, was athleticism and how they were grading athleticism. And he said, the guy in the Northeast might put, a 50 on the athlete, for a guy or put a 60 on an athlete plus really good on an athlete because he plays 3 sports, in the Northeast. And then a scout in Southern California might put a 50, which is average on an athlete who only plays baseball. But, there's certain, I guess, athletic traits, raw athleticism, which more or less is where we're going with this Loden Sports thing, that kind of underscore really important things like the tools that you're grading as a scout. So that guy in the Northeast might be thinking, oh, this guy's a plus athlete because he plays 3 sports. Well, he averages 8 points a game in basketball. He's like a backup on the football team, and, he's a pretty good baseball player. And then the kid in Southern California only plays baseball, and he's an average athlete because he doesn't play other sports. And, he's an electric runner. And, if you put him on other sports fields, courts, whatever it would be, he'd probably be a pretty natural something, even if the skill wasn't there. So
Right.
anyway, that was kind of the thought behind it. He came over to USA Baseball from the Padres, and he designed this athletic evaluation that was pretty in depth. We're doing a 30-yard sprint with gait analysis, 10-yard split. There's a broad jump involved. There were counter movement jumps involved, single leg jumps involved. In addition, there was like reactive agility, there was stuff cognitive, vision screen, and then we're also collecting all the ball flight data using Rapsoda. So it was kind of like an objective data capture operations team. And we were functioning on behalf of the 30 clubs in the commissioner's office and traveled around the country for a number of years, evaluating all of the top draft talent. So that was all the USA Baseball national teams, East Coast Pro Showcase. We ran our own events for a period of time there. And then also, went up to the Cape for 2 summers. That's a bunch of guys there. So fast forward to like 2019, 2020, it's about when COVID shut everything down. I had evaluated over 10,000 athletes, massive data set, over 80 first rounders at the time, and started digging into the data. It was the first time that I think I really got some real analytics chops, and it was all self-taught. And it was just because I wanted to understand what this data was and where the value could potentially be. And I basically took, certain metrics that we were capturing and ran regression on it against things that matter on a baseball field, like how hard you throw, how hard you can hit the ball, found correlations, and then developed a 20/80 scouting scale for these athletic markers. And then quickly found that there seemed to be a relationship between guys who score better on the athletic stuff and draft position and tools. Ultimately, it helped a left-handed pitcher by the name of Garrett Crochet get into the conversation at 11 with the White Sox, and they ended up taking him. So that was kind of the tipping point where I was like, okay, there's something here. And I probably need to go, explore the world for myself a little bit. So that's kind of what Loden was born out of.
What is that predictive functionality that you found? Like from the data that you collect, what is it that says this guy's got a real shot? He may be flying under the radar, but we should look under the hood a little bit more. We should dig into this guy, or maybe he's someone that you should take a look at that you're probably not right now. What is that? What's the information you're collecting that has the ability to say that?
It's mostly looking at jump power and top end running speed, right? I think there's the job of a scout is to, especially a professional scout, is to identify not just like, oh, this is the best player in the draft, but like today's day 2 of the draft, and they'll go 20 rounds deep. And there's going to be guys that are going to be selected today from round 4 all the way to round 20 that scouts are going to be really excited about, because they're going to feel like they've identified something that is the reason why this player wasn't selected in the top 3 rounds. And if their player development can fix that or improve that, then they're potentially going to be a big leaguer. And I think that's what a lot of people who maybe don't follow the drafts as closely don't really like. A lot of people just kind of see like, oh, this guy was a first rounder, and then they kind of whatever. But there's so many guys in baseball that make it to the big leagues because of a small tweak or a small adjustment, right? So consider a guy who might have really good jump power, or might be a really good top end runner, and you look at the swing, and per a traditional coach, like, that swing doesn't play or it's not very good. Well, if there's a player development system out there that feels like they can make a certain adjustment, and they feel like the swing decisions from all of the film they've watched and all the times they've seen this player, the swing decisions are good. He's not chasing. He's swinging at strikes. And like there's bat to ball skills, but the contact quality isn't very good. Well, if we can make a swing change, contact quality improves, and then he has, this athleticism kind of underneath it, then you might have someone who has some major league value someday. And that guy could go in the 12th round. That guy could go in the 7th round, So I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. On the pitching side, it might be a guy who's really big, really strong, really athletic, and something that has been a discussion point for better part of the past 5+ years is like, what kind of mover is he? Is he able to get into certain positions? If he goes through a movement screen, what's his hip internal rotation look like? Is he, kind of locked up? Does he not hinge properly? Is that something that we can unlock with our player development side? Because if we can, and then he can get into his legs more, well, we know the legs have, plus a premium jump power, then maybe there's more velocity in there, and it's not more velocity from a weighted ball program. It's more velocity from the fact that he's got all this natural athleticism and he's just not tapping into it right now.
It sounds to me like, I feel like historically baseball is always behind the curve, right? Probably a fair assessment. So it's, to me, it sounds like the New England Patriots of 15 years ago, of 10 years ago, or even the Kansas City Chiefs of maybe the last 5 to 10 years, where they're making their money. I mean, they're truly winning Super Bowls by who they're drafting in those late rounds. It's that little undersized 5'7", 5'9" guy that can run like the wind, who's athletic as heck, who's can shift left and right better than anyone else. It's those guys that are winning Super Bowls for the Patriots and the Chiefs, and now that's making its way into Major League Baseball. That fair assessment there?
Yeah, I think because you've got teams like the Dodgers and like the Cleveland Guardians and some the Rays, you got a number of these minor league systems that are so advanced on the player development side. And then you kind of have this discrepancy towards, I'm not going to name any names, but I think we can look at the standings and see, who's not producing homegrown talent. I don't think it's ever been a case in the history of baseball where who you get drafted by is probably more of an indicator of what you're going to be as a big leaguer than, who you are as a player currently.
And so you think that played a role into last night in the first and second rounds, where, when you watch that, everyone said, this guy's going to go, he's going to be the first pick, he's going to be the second pick, he's going to be the third pick. And then none of those guys got picked. Do you think any of that has something to play here where, veteran players, college kids, high school kids that had parents in Major League Baseball are saying, no, I don't want to have my son go play for that team? You think that played a role at all last night?
I don't know if it's as much as we don't want our kid to go play for that team as much as it's not going to just line up as like the most talented player goes 1, second most talented player goes 2, third most talented player. Because there's a lot of things that go into play with the MLB draft, like money manipulation, right? So like the guy who went first and probably the guy who went second, because there wasn't like a true top end talent, like they're taking a cut. So like when these bonuses come out on all these first rounders from last night, there's a number of guys, especially on the high school side, that are going to sign for under slot. Now, for the people who are listening who don't know what slot or under slot or taking a cut means, more or less ahead of the draft, MLB assigns a slot value for every pick in the draft. The first pick was over $10 million. And it's, so if a guy signs for $8 million with the first overall pick in the draft, and he's taking a cut of $2 million. Now, every team, you add it up over your 20 rounds, and that's your bonus pool of money that you have to spend on players. So if you're saving $2 million with your first pick, you can apply that $2 million and go over slot on a more talented player in the second round. Or you're potentially trying to convince a kid to not go to LSU or not go to Ole Miss. And now we're in an era where Ole Miss and LSU and Tennessee and all these SEC schools, ACC schools, they've got money now to say, hey, if they want you for $1.5 million, we've got amount for the next 3 years, which is going to surpass that bonus. And now it's a real thought for the 2 weeks before the signing deadline of like, do I go pro or do I go to school? But anyway, to go back to what you were saying, there is a certain element of like org fit, right? There are certain orgs that feel like they're better at developing pitching. Certain orgs that feel like they're better at developing hitting. There's orgs that feel like they can do it all. And then there's some orgs that think they can do it all and they can't do any of it. So I don't know. That was a conversation I had with Jeff Ponce, my buddy who works at Baseball America. He covers the pro side of the game. And one of the first articles he's going to put out after this draft is who he feels like are the best picks essentially off of org fit. Like, hey, I really liked what the Milwaukee Brewers did in the draft because they stayed true to what they do really well. And they selected a bunch of arms with interesting traits. And they've historically done a really good job of developing those guys. Case in point, Jacob Mizorowski, who's, if anyone hasn't seen him, got selected to the All-Star game after 5 big league appearances. So, org fit.
Yeah, right. So the one theme that I heard last night constantly was athleticism, athlete, athleticism, and I think clearly the 27 shortstops getting selected, 17 of them from the high school side. was, hey, we're picking athletes. They move well, they run well, they throw well, they hit per power, they hit. But they kept saying athlete, athlete, athlete. And at the same time, you said it, and they said it last night. Maybe this guy doesn't play shortstop. Maybe he gets moved to third base. Maybe he gets moved to first base. Maybe he, becomes an outfielder. And they kept bringing up, the Gary Sheffields of the world who got drafted as a shortstop and end up getting pushed out to left field because he did a lot of things well. He could hit, but he wasn't a shortstop. What's your take on that from obviously from the performance analytics standpoint, from that side of things? That's clearly what they're doing, right? It's just, especially from the position player standpoint, maybe not so much on a pitching side, but they're selecting athletes and they're going to figure out positions later.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. I think there's some teams that are scientific about it. I think there's other teams that maybe think they're scientific about it or they're not scientific about it. And they're selecting the best player on a high school team and he plays shortstop on his high school team. I think the thinking here is that if we roll him out there as a shortstop, then, if he ends up at third base or second base, or he moves to a corner outfield position, if he's a center fielder or whatever it is, like there's a place for that player to go if they start in the middle of the field. If you're drafting a right fielder, left fielder, first base, third base straight out the chute, then the next position for them to go if they don't stay at that position is, off the field, DH, and then to make it to the big leagues as a DH, you got to be, Marcell Ozuna or David Ortiz. I mean, you can go look, like you've got to be one of the best hitters in the game to be a DH.
Yeah.
Right. Like it is, if that's the only value you're providing. So I think getting back to your comment on athleticism, something that I found is that top end running speed correlates to defensive run value in the middle of the field. Right. So what I see is particularly with outfielders is that the guys who can really burn have a chance to be a premium defensive center fielder, even if right now the routes aren't sharp or like maybe the instincts aren't all the way there. You give this guy 2 or 3 years in the minor leagues and he's going to be able to get to balls that maybe the guy who to the eye is taking better routes, has better instincts, doesn't have that same level of speed, doesn't have the same type of engine, if you will, athletically. You're just talking about a guy who potentially has a higher ceiling and defensive value. And if you go look at the big league game right now, like defensive center fielders, I think are as good as I've seen since I've started watching baseball. Pete Crow Armstrong is outstanding. The guy in Colorado, Brenton Doyle. And then Denzel Clark, who just got called up to the Sacramento A's. I mean, it's incredible to watch, these guys go get it out in center field. And these are all guys that, at some point or another encountered the athletic testing that I was doing and tested exceptionally.
Yeah, you said this, the talent in center field's better than ever, but I've said this to my own kids that I coach and to my own kids that are playing is I think college baseball is better than it's ever been in the history of college baseball. And pros is probably, it's probably the same, or not probably, it is the same, right? Because there are so many, freakish athletic talents that are out there. Everyone runs faster, everyone throws harder, everyone moves a little bit better, they hit the ball harder. I mean, they're just everyone's bigger, faster, stronger. So the game is a lot more difficult. So I think we talked a lot about, those 17 high school kids getting drafted, 27 being shortstops, but the reality is still of the 105, I think that were drafted last night, 70 of them are from the college ranks. So most talent is still coming from college. How do we educate? Well, let me go back. You made a comment about a burner, a guy that runs really fast. What does that actually mean, to people that are listening to it? What is that top end speed that's elite, that's off the charts? If all these guys are running to that level, what is that speed? What's a burner? What does a burner mean to you?
A burner. Okay. So I think this is a good question because at the combine, they run the 30 and traditionally in baseball, you run 60. So you'll see 60 times at PBR and PG showcases. Like 60 is so antiquated. It's an endurance test. If you're a baseball player, you reach your top end speed somewhere around like 15 yards on a 30 or a 60. And, really you get a good indicator of top end speed just looking at a split beyond 10, like 10 to 20 or 10 to 30 or 20 to 30. That's the number that we should be looking at. That's the number that's correlated to defensive run value, right? And that's the number that ultimately, when guys get underway, it's like Garrett Martin's a great example. I know that one hits close to home. It's like, Garrett might not have, 60 or 70 home to first times, right? Which is a traditional way that, scouts or evaluate speed. But when he's underway, he's much faster. He's at least plus, if not, plus and a half runner underway. And what that's translated to since he's been in pro ball with the Yankees is that he's been one of the best defensive outfielders by all their advanced metrics in their entire system. And it's maybe not showing up in the amount of stolen bases that he had at Austin P, but it's showing up in plays that, he gets to that top end speed. So maybe it's a little bit more of what's going on in the outfield, a little bit more of what's going on when he goes first to third, or he goes first to home, or he goes second to home, or he hits the ball to the gap. Like something I told him 2 years ago. It's like, you hit anything to the gap and just put your head down and go to third base. Make them throw you out.
Right. So is there a number though that or a range of, if it's, I guess traditionally it's going back to basically what they're measuring is a 10-yard split might be the equivalent to that or is it miles per hour? Like how is this getting measured and what is that range of, elite speed?
Yeah. So if you're looking on Baseball Savant, which is a great resource, you can see every big leaguer and you can see how fast they're running. Elite run speed is going to be somewhere in that 29 to 30 range feet per second.
Yeah.
That's something you can go look again, every player, in the big leagues and see, what their kind of their top end sprint speed range is. And if it's in that 20 to 30 feet per second, that's elite. The thing that I think muddies the waters a little bit, especially with looking at showcase data, if you're looking at a 60 and all you have is a 10-yard split, well, the first 10 is going to be acceleration. And guys who are stronger earlier are going to perform well in that first 10. And sometimes that brings down the 30 time, or that brings down the 60 time because they get going faster than the kid who's maybe less strong but twitchier. Right. So it's hard to say hey, because there's not a big, public data set of this is what good top end speed is, because they're just not looking at it. The showcase companies just aren't looking at it like that. But if you look at it again, big league level, 28, 20, 30 feet per second. I think if you were doing if you got a 30 time from a PBR showcase and you had a 10 split, subtract your 30 from the 10. If it's somewhere around 2 flat, you're flying. I think if it's in that 210 to 215, 210 to 220 range, you're probably about an average runner.
Okay. I think that's great data for people listening there. So then let's spend the rest of the time. We've talked about the Major League Draft and the major leaguers, and we can get into 32 guys, getting drafted out of the SEC and another 13 from the ACC, and so there's kind of this massive divergence of talent even at the college level. But let's talk about how do we get kids there? What's important? What are some traps that parents make or parents get kind of sucked into, and what should they really be doing to help develop their son or daughter in sports? So let's kind of start there and let's first ask the question I think that everyone talks about nowadays, which is early specialization. So you talk about athleticism. What is your opinion on the role of early specialization? Can you be an athlete as defined last night as, athleticism? Can you be an athlete by playing only one sport, or do you really need to play multiple sports in order to be considered an athlete on these metrics?
There's a couple different layers to this question. I think that to get to the answer first and then to go back, early sports specialization, I'm not for it if you're 8 or 9 years old. High school, ninth grade, great. You don't need to play 3 sports in high school. You don't need to play 2 sports in high school unless you really love it. Honestly, you should just be playing 1 sport in high school if you're feeling like this is something that you're trending towards committing to and trying to be a collegiate player. That's just what you need to do in today's climate, right? So if someone's telling you otherwise, like, oh, you want to play football and basketball and baseball because you love all these sports. If you're serious about, unless you're an exceptional talent, if you're an above average talent, you need to just play 1 sport at that point.
High school coaches are gonna hate you for saying that. It's controversial, right? It's gonna make it a lot more difficult for high school sports to be able to have high school sports at the level that they had traditionally. So that's, I mean, obviously it's pretty controversial. How do you overcome that? I mean, because there's a lot of pressure that these kids receive to play. If you're an athlete, everyone wants you in all those sports. If baseball's your gig, they still want you to play football and basketball. So how do you overcome that?
It's all tied to keeping up with the Joneses, right? So if the majority of people are already doing this, which they are, the only way for you to potentially keep up with them to get to that level and that sport that you want to get to is you've got to do what everyone else is doing, right? And I'm going to add another layer to that. I'm not saying to play that sport for 365 days. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is instead of a football season, which is going to run your body into the ground like no other time of the year between August and December, you could be using that time to get off your feet, not being on a baseball field. Maybe you're hitting a couple times a week, whatever it is, and you're really just not, you're nailing into like a college level strength and conditioning program. And you're getting yourself physically at that level where you can potentially step onto a college field as a freshman and compete for a spot against someone who's 3 or 4 years older than you. Because that's the reality of Power 4 sports right now. And that's not just Power 4 sports, but baseball at every level of the college game is that if you are a high school kid and you are getting on campus and your body is not up to par with a 20, 21, 22, 23-year-old kid that just came in through the transfer portal or whatever, or, the returning 5th-year senior, whatever, you're not going to win that job. That guy's got experience and he's got a much more physical body. And that guy is going to be way easier to trust come February than here's this guy who just came in from high school. Doesn't matter how talented he is. It's very few high school players winning jobs at the college level, at the college that they're committed to. And I think that's why you see so many players in the portal. It's because they show up to school, they don't win the job, and then they have to end up in the portal, and then they're already set back a year. So to go back to, high school coaches might not want to hear that. The reality is that like you need to be using that season when you'd otherwise be playing another sport to build up your body for when you're in season for the sport that you care about.
So do you think that's why so many of these high school athletes last night, I don't know what traditionally what the number is of high school guys getting drafted in the first couple rounds, but 35 is a significant number. To your point, most of those, if you watched that draft last night, they were, 200 pounds, 210 pounds, 215 pounds. They looked like men. They were physically strong. They were mentally mature. I mean, they've clearly got some on and off the field training to prepare them for the positions that they're in today. There's less risk for these clubs to select these guys and pay them what they're going to pay them because they're veterans, almost, right? They've competed in probably hundreds of games. So, forget my question in there, but do you think that's what's happening? And, how do you best prepare that kid, for what's going to happen in the competitive nature of club sports now?
Yeah, I would say that the majority of those high school kids that were selected last night don't have a ton more physical projection. Now there's a handful of them, but like a lot of them are as physically mature and as strong and as athletic as the 22-year-old college player. And I think that's part of the reason why there's confidence to pay that kid out of high school from the club side is because we don't have to project on it. We can see that he's gone to showcases and he's played in these big events with Wood and he's hit balls 105, 108, 110, which is what guys are hitting, with Wood in the big leagues. Right. So, When you see it with your eyes, you don't have to project on it, then the risk, I guess, goes down. Refresh me on your question.
And um, this is scary, right? I mean, if you're raising a kid and that wants to play baseball and wants to compete at the highest level, it's just kind of a scary time for them to be in. It's in order to get there, right? You need to train a lot and train not just in games, not just playing a lot of games, but they probably need to play a lot of games. They need to be on a team that's really good, surround themselves around other talent that's really good. They need to play against the other really good talent. They probably need to travel in order to play that talent. And then aside from that, they need high level, trainers from when it comes to getting physically stronger, great hitting coaches, great pitching coaches, great fielding coaches, because all those kids last night were super polished. And if you want to play at that level or play in the SEC or the ACC at this stage of the game, you need to do all those things. So what's the kind of the uncomfortable truth for parents at this point that's part of this topic that is not getting talked about openly, but maybe is getting whispered behind the scenes?
I think part of what it is that, and this is particularly true for college athletics, as of the NIL and the portal and all of these different things that have changed, is that previously your high school kid who is being looked at by a college program was probably viewed as a development project, or, this is a player that can help us 2 years down the road. It's a player that we like, that we feel like if we sink our teeth into a little bit, like we can get him to where he's a contributor for us. That just doesn't exist anymore. Right. So where the pro game has always viewed the high school player as a dollar sign, how much is this player worth based on the tools, based on the performance, based on X, Y, and Z? Colleges are now looking at high school players the same way. And that's why a lot of these high school kids are showing up on campus and not winning jobs, because they find out in the first month of fall ball, is this high school kid going to be able to compete for us here? And they're making decisions on a year-to-year basis. I mean, you look at Tennessee. Tennessee has 4 returning pitchers from last year's roster. Everyone else either got drafted or is in the portal.
Yeah.
Right? They're not afraid to take that guy that they really liked 2 years ago as a high school prospect, and after a couple weeks in the fall, say, you're going to have to go find somewhere else to play because you're just not going to play here. Whereas in the past, it was, we're committed to you, you committed to us, and we're committed to you, and we're going to send you out in the summer, and you're going to develop, and then you're going to come back, and maybe you'll have a bullpen role for us next year if we can trust you after a good fall ball. And then maybe by the time you're a junior, you're picking up some weekend starts, or maybe you're a Sunday starter for us.
So if you have, if you had a kid that's 16 years old, in the recruiting process, that's 6'2", athletic as heck, wirely, but weighs 165 pounds, what, and is projectable, right? Has a high ceiling, like, really has a shot to play at a really high level. We can define whatever a high level is at a later stage, but if that's your kid, or if that's someone that a family that you really trust, where do you suggest that kid goes and plays then? What college, what type of college? I have to say the college. What type of college? Where should he go to go and play? It doesn't sound like you're saying, hey, go to the SEC, because he's 165 pounds. He's probably not going to play because there's 23-year-old men that they're going to beat him out.
Yeah, I've got this circled. So in preparation for this, one truth, it's really 2 truths, but I'm going to talk about this myth. And I think in the past, it was always like, try and commit to the best school that recruits you. I think there was at least that feeling, right? And I think you still see that a little bit. I think there's like, okay, if I'm a kid and I've got 5, 6 offers, and one of them's Power 4 and the other 5 are mid-majors, like, I want to go to the Power 4. That's cool. It looks great. It looks great on Instagram. It looks great on signing day. The gear looks better. The whole nine. Like when you visit for the football game, sweet. I would almost advise the complete other way. And if you've got 6 offers, I would go to the one that maybe isn't the best from a baseball perspective. I would just go to the one where you're at the most maybe the best one that you feel the most confident that you're going to be able to play right away. Because what you're going to do is you're going to go to that school, you're going to hit because you're going to play every day. Doesn't matter. It could be Northern Kentucky University. No knock on them. They've got a decent program. It could be Western Kentucky. Well, now I'm using just Kentucky schools, but George Mason. Like there's a lot of really good mid-major schools that I think as a talented high school player that you could go play at right away and you perform. You don't have to enter the portal after your freshman year. You will be sucked into the portal and someone will be throwing a lot of money at you to come play at a Power Four. Right. That's the route. That is the route now. And that's not just the route as of this past year. Like go back a couple of years. Ryan Waldschmidt was this kid out of Florida and he was athletic as all heck. And he went to Charleston Southern and he was like the conference freshman player of the year. And then he went to Kentucky out of that. He played 2 years at Kentucky. He was the leadoff guy for Kentucky when they were the number one seed, or the number one team in the country last year. And then he was a first round pick by the Diamondbacks, signed for, I think, $3 million. Like, that's the route. Do that.
So I'm going to get back to that. But my question that pops up is the SEC, maybe you throw the ACC in there as well, but I think the SEC is clear difference right now in terms of talent. Are they just simply the new minor league system for Major League Baseball?
If it's not the new minor leagues, it's at least you're skipping levels of the minor leagues. So I do think that you could say that there's like a level of that. Yeah, I mean, essentially, if you're an SEC player and you were drafted last night, like you're not seeing the conflicts, you're not seeing rookie ball, you're going straight to A ball.
Yeah. And
some of these guys are going straight to high A. Some of these guys will go to high A and they'll be there for 2 weeks and then they'll get promoted to double A. And you look at some of the trajectories of some of these guys, like Paul Skeens is a notable example. Wyatt Langford moved very fast through the Texas system. Dylan Cruz moved very fast through Washington system. These are all SEC players. Chase Burns at Wake Forest, which is probably one of the higher tier, bigger money ACC programs. Like Chase Burns is already in the big leagues. He was drafted last year. So yes.
Yeah.
High end Power Four baseball, you're shortening that time in the minor leagues.
Yeah. 30% of the guys drafted last night came from the SEC. And, I think there's a good amount of them that have a chance to get moved up pretty quickly. So then the SEC, SEC is call it the minor league system. You go there as a high school kid, your likelihood of getting cut in fall ball is high. We won't, can't really define that because we don't really know. And the path now is, go somewhere where you can play, go somewhere you can play early, go somewhere you can get developed, continue to get bigger, faster, stronger. And then you have a chance to get paid, maybe twice. You get paid to go transfer into the SEC or the ACC as an NIL guy. And then if you can perform at that level, then you have a chance to get paid again. That's seems to be the path. And then the opposite, or not the opposite, but the same thing's happening at these D3s and the D2s, right? As now you got, guys going to the mid-major, they go the mid-major route, then they go from mid-major to the Power Fours. Well, the guys that are going to D3s and D2s and NAIAs, JUCOs that are performing really well, then they're getting their big jump going to, potentially to the Power Four as well, but a lot of them are making that jump to mid-majors as well from there too. And you can see, like, I follow the Big East quite a bit for obvious reasons, but there's a ton of Big East talent that goes to Power Fours, but there's also a ton of talent coming in from, smart kids from Division threes and Division twos that are going into the Big East to play. And making that transition, seems to be pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of just what it's kind of become. There's never been a worse time, and I don't think this is just exclusive to baseball. I think this is every sport in college. There's never been a worse time to be a high school kid trying to play college sports.
Yeah,
because everything's tied to money because we can pay players now. Like this is the other side of the fence, right? The grass is greener on the other side. It's like, oh, pay our college athletes. Well, now that we're paying our college athletes, they're going to be treated like they're being paid. And if you're not performing, then you're gone. And if you're if you're not performing, compare and look, it's two different levels, right? Like people like view like the NIL and portal as kind of like this one. It's two different dynamics that are working together in like a really violent and not great way. Where it's here's a player who gets some NIL money, goes to this school. Well, what you're contending with is like, okay, you're a high school player who got offered some NIL money. You show up on campus, and every year there's a guy hitting 400 or 450 at a mid-major school who's now 22 years old. Who now, if I'm a college coach, I'm sitting here, I'm like, that guy has a track record of performance at the Division I level. This guy doesn't. So like, give me this guy because I need this guy to win. Because if I don't win, then I'm not keeping my job.
Yep.
I think that's kind of like something that's not talked about, is that there's never been more pressure on college coaching staffs to win than there are now that there's money attached to it. Now that there's, potentially as high as $2-3 million tied to a roster at the SEC level.
Yeah, I had a real raw conversation one time in a golf cart in the finale of competitive sports right out in Jupiter. And the real raw conversation was, he's like, look at this kid. He's like, look at this kid. He said, he can't play for us. And this is a top level school. I won't say what or who it was, but he's like this kid can't play for us. He's like, the summer ball coach was really pressuring us to take him. If we didn't come here, he was going to go there. And so we're like, fine, we'll take him. We'll take the risk on him. He's like, but look at him. He hasn't gotten any better. He hasn't gotten any bigger. He hasn't got any stronger. He hasn't got any faster. He's gained weight. He's out of shape. He's like, there's no way he could play at our level. He goes, so now what? Now I have to cut this kid. He's going to come to the fall ball. I'm going to have to cut him, or I'm going to cut him before, after this tournament and before he even comes to our place. And he's like, until these rules change, this is the stuff that's going to continue to happen because I need, and he's frankly said, I need to keep my job. I love what I do. I get paid a lot of money and we get paid a lot of money to win, and I'm not going to not win. And so who gets, cut in that situation, who gets hurt in that situation is that kid that, went above his pay grade currently, and whose club coach didn't really give him some great advice as to where he should have played or where he should have went, because he's not going to play there. We got to wrap this up. But let's lead this on a couple notes here. Let me leave you with a couple questions of, at the same time, what's some of the best advice that you've ever received? And then, what would be advice that you'd give others, especially, how difficult this conversation was. What's the advice that you would give others with the experience that you've had?
The advice that I would give others off of kind of everything that I've seen and gathered is, again, I'm going to trace it back to, the whole, like, trying to commit to the best school that you possibly can. I would make the advice to try and commit to somewhere where you feel like you're going to be able to play immediately, and go that route. Because I know that that's not, that there's like a block in people's minds because they're still thinking of how things were, 3, 4, 5 years ago. You're not going to have the traditional college experience. I think you just kind of got to get that into your head. You're not going to go to one school for 4 years if you're trying to advance as a player. Now, if you're comfortable, going to a school and, whatever happens to your baseball career is what happens to your baseball career, then yeah, maybe you'll have the traditional college experience. But if you're trying to advance in this game, you need to play and you need to take advantage of every opportunity. So I think that's the advice that I would give. I would also say that it's really important to lean into all of your resources, exhaust your resources as a high school player, as a college player. There's more and more high school and college players that have agents now. And like, there's always been a stigma around agents. I think if you choose the right agent, it's really important to have someone working for you. Not everybody needs an agent, but everyone needs someone that's potentially working. And I'm not just saying, a high school player, draft related, whatever. I think the value of a lot of advisors or agents in today's day and age is like, okay, when I perform really well at that mid-major, he's got connections to potentially move me into a higher level of college baseball. He's got the opportunity to kind of bounce a couple different schools and see who's got NIL money for me and potentially make me some money there, because that money's out there, and like, go get that money. You know, don't be the person who's like, oh, I'm not worried about that or whatever. It's like, no, if the money's there, like, Tony, you know, like, one day the clock stops and you're not playing the game anymore. Like, if you can make money, at a college playing baseball, like, go take the money. So yeah, the best advice that I ever received isn't related to any of this. It's just, a lot of it's just to be like unwavering. Don't make an exception for one player. All right. So this is more in like the coaching bucket. It's like, you know, someone that I look up to, someone that's been a mentor and a close friend of mine has coached at high school for over 20 years, and he's never made an exception for a player. And because he's done that, he's got longevity. He's had a ton of success, and the players that play for him year over year buy into his program. So the minute you make an exception for one player, you break all that, and then who knows what happens when you break that foundation. But I think that's kind of an important thing to say.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. This has been, I feel like this is a conversation that we can continue on for another hour, but I know, you know, we got to cut it short, got to respect your time. So I appreciate you coming on, appreciate everything that you're doing for player development, for, you know, data analytics, and, you know, what it's doing for the game. Any final parting thoughts that you have that you'd like to say before we let you go?
Parting thoughts before I go. Nope.
Well, the one thing that I think that we haven't talked about, which is, you know, this is definitely something that we'll add in for future coach and counselor podcasts, is all this costs money, right? All this there's a massive time commitment for families in order to have their son or daughter play at a high level, and there's a massive financial burden because all those people and all those things cost money to be involved in. So, you know, we'll get into that in future. That's why Operation Player Assist is our sponsor for the Coach and the Counselor podcast, and we'll get into that in a much greater depth at different times in the future. But Matt, thank you. Hopefully you had a great experience last night at the draft. Looks like you're going to the All-Star game this week, right?
Yeah, I'm going to try and be out there tomorrow. So see what Derby has for us tonight.
Excellent. Well, appreciate it. Enjoy your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Tony.
All right. Take care.